Okay, I think we left off at the slide before this where we had a doubt of malignancy. So just another, somebody actually raised this point as a private message. So I thought I'll just include this as a side case. Now, if we have head mass with calculi and changes of acuity, so if you find all those, the perinephric fat stranding and all those kind of features there, peripancreatic dirty, very obviously with some cysts and all that, very obvious acute pancreatitis.
You need to share your video on the slide.
How do I do that? One sec.
Share slides.
Share screen. Okay. Yeah.
Share.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, fine. Full screen. Yeah, that's
right. So this is the, so if you have typical features like this, then we do have one option. The question which somebody asked was, is there any role for, to confirm that it's a malignancy? Is there any role for a follow-up scan, give a gap of 3 to 4 weeks? So this is usually a good idea in many malignancies which are slower growing. So if you have a colon cancer with a metastasis to the liver and you want to see how the liver metastasis is behaving, usually you're not going to, kill the patient by waiting. So the original, nowadays we have a lot of options available, but about 20 years back, that used to be a standard technique actually to look at the biology by waiting for 3 months, doing nothing and doing a repeat scan. So where there's a relatively slower growth, that is an option. In pancreatic malignancy, usually we do not, the tumor, the kinetics are much worse. Gallbladder, pancreas, the head pancreas tends to be a more malignant cancer. So normally waiting for 6 weeks and all may not be, or 3 months is probably not such a good idea. But if you have changes of acuity and a doubt of malignancy, because this is one place where the CT scan can actually mislead you. And you may not be able to pinpoint a malignancy, and going ahead in an acute pancreatitis it tends to be much more vascular. You might cause problems, particularly if they are vascular thrombosis and such like, or even compression of the vessels. You will get a much more difficult surgery. So in these cases, it is probably actually wise to wait a couple of weeks, at least 2 to 3 weeks, and repeat a scan. If the mass lesion which was suspect is actually reducing in size, you can be fairly sure that it is only an inflammatory process and not a malignancy. We may not be able to see an actual increase in those 2 or 3 weeks, but any obvious decrease, you can wait a little longer. Also, if the patient is otherwise a very poor risk, again, it's probably wiser to wait and see the biology, particularly in view of the background knowledge that many of these with malignancy, where you cannot differentiate, which means it's a large malignancy if at all, it's sometimes very difficult to actually cure a patient even with surgery. So I think it's important to have that background knowledge, because we normally think that we are the saviors, the messiahs, and we have to go in irrespective. And sometimes we might actually kill a benign patient with very aggressive surgery. So keep that in balance. And these are the kind of patients which probably need to be sent to specialist centers, both to take the decision as well as to take a call on whether to do surgery and what kind of surgery to do. So this is just an aside as an answer to the question which was raised, and I thought many of you might have. Please feel free to actually collect questions. I'd rather that this address actual problems that you have. I'm trying to give you a range of problems which I have faced and which many people have specifically asked for. Acute exacerbation, we just came to that. Now we have ultrasound shows a pseudocyst in the head with compression of the biliary tree. Now we basically, I think we left it here when we left off last time. So the question, I didn't realize this was part of this. I think made another slide on the same thing. So one question which is frequently asked is, do we need to drain the cyst? If I may be permitted to go to that particular slide, actually. So I think it's very, very important to realize that we have adequate evidence that the pseudocyst is a complication and not a surgical disease. I've seen a lot of surgeons uh, treat pseudocyst like a disease in isolation. It is not. We must understand the pathophysiology, the pathogenesis of a cyst is either what is presumed to be the fluid from acute pancreatitis, which is coalesced, which is no longer called pseudocyst now in the the recent Atlanta classification. So actually, if you go by the recent Atlanta classification, many of the pseudocysts will probably not need treatment because many of what were considered pseudocysts is now walled off pancreatic necrosis. So I think it's important if you find a cyst to see how long it has been there. And in chronic pancreatitis, all the cysts are any pseudocyst associated with a chronic pseudocyst. So it's important to document whether a communication is present or can be seen or not. So the first type, the old type, used to be called the post-necrotic cyst. That means some areas necrosed or there's a leak and that is collected. Those can actually resolve much more commonly on spontaneous management. But the ones which have a clear, there is a ductal disruption which is caused a pseudocyst, and the ductal disruption actually continues. Now, these are the ones which would need management. Now, it's been adequately shown that if you're draining the duct alone, so in chronic pancreatitis associated cysts, we don't, addressing only the cyst is a problem. It should not be done. What is more important is to actually address the underlying chronic pancreatitis duct, where the obstruction has caused the disruption. So you must tackle the cause. It's very, very important to tackle the cause. So the duct is disrupted because of an obstructed system with a very high pressure, which is ruptured. Now, if we only treat the ruptured part, it is meaningless. You might get another cyst at another place or recurrence of pain or not addressing it. In fact, there's adequate evidence to show that you do not need, even if you do not drain the cyst, you will get, and there is the communication is existing, it will actually get treated on its own. So if you just drain the duct alone, you just do a Pusto or a Frey procedure and not address the cyst, just say put in a single needle and empty it out, it is adequate because the cyst is not a disease. So I just wanted to stress this point because both in acute and chronic pancreatitis, we tend to see the cyst as a separate disease. And that's why we see these dichotomies in treatment that exist amongst various people. Once we find it and we feel that it cannot be addressed by draining the cyst alone, then again, look at the main duct alone. If that needs drainage, can either a Frey or Whipple, if it is appropriate, address it. If it's a large head pseudocyst or a complicated one, towards the duodenum, sometimes a Whipple might actually be simpler than, and the patient has pain. It'll address both the issues again. Sometimes these are smaller intrapancreatic retention cysts or a small cyst which is resolving and still in the head area. Again, a Frey, if the cyst cavity can be incorporated in the same cavity of the Frey, can also address it. And finally, if it's a definitely discrete cyst which is there, you can actually drain it into the same loop or another Roux loop. Make sure that, because sometimes I've found that it is a little inconvenient to do it. So there's a tendency to do the Pusto first. And if after that you find that the pseudocyst in the head is actually higher, the lie is coming, the pancreas, the body and tail pancreas is coming from left upper quadrant towards the right iliac fossa. So now taking the loop up can cause a kinking. So take care that if you are planning to, drain it into the same loop, one stratagem that you can apply is drain the cyst first. So start with the Roux end towards the cyst and then continue with the Pusto or the Frey drainage part. You can, before you actually start the suturing, you can just see the loop and see which is looking like more convenient. Just apply it in both the areas and see where it's going to be less kinking. So that's one technical point I wanted to add. And quite a few times when there are small, particularly when there's small head pseudocysts, it's important to see, don't not just label them as a retention cyst, but do look whether it's an IPM or not. So if you, for instance, opened it and you find any papillary processes or any mucus-like material inside it, it should be serous, typical pancreatic juice kind. If you find any of them, please send a frozen section, or any doubts, even take a permanent or, and then make sure that it's not an IPMN you're dealing with, in which case, again, a Whipple or, a total pancreatectomy might be actually more appropriate depending on the site and location. Then we have the other important the conundrum which is there if the bile duct is dilated. Now, I think I'm not sure we addressed it the other day, but in the first day I did say that if the bile duct is dilated alone, please correlate it clinically. Asymptomatic biliary obstruction can be harmful, can lead on to secondary biliary cirrhosis, but it doesn't happen if there is no jaundice or the LFT is completely normal. So it will go through the process of actually having an alkaline phosphatase elevation, some elevation of bilirubin as well, and then go on over months at a minimum. Even in malignancy, you need 6 months of biliary obstruction to cause secondary biliary cirrhosis. So this is the case for actually waiting. So if you see a bile duct which is dilated in this setting of acute exacerbation, please do not jump to surgery, both for the reason of acuity, as well as the fact that this bile duct compression can be because of the acute process, because of the mass effect on the bile duct. And if you do a follow-up liver, even if a single LFT is elevated, so it's important to have serial LFTs showing the LFTs. When we discussed the first case last time, I think somebody pointed out that he had a patient with serial LFT elevation. That is always the most sinister. Any progressive, symptoms or elevation of enzymes is a sinister marker for malignancy. So it's a good idea not to do anything. Wait for 3 to 6 weeks. Do repeat serial LFTs, and only if it is increasing do you need to drain the bile duct or look for malignancy, as the case may be. Another question which was asked to me on WhatsApp was, I think it was I forget who asked me, that is there any role for EUS? I think Dr. Radhakrishnan had asked that at that particular point, and I think I digressed at that moment to say that I will look for a stone. But I think an important point that I probably misunderstood Dr. Radha at that time, I think it's important to emphasize that you do, if you're looking for a malignancy specifically and you have a reasonable doubt on CT and you want to confirm that on EUS and prove it in say for instance in a poor risk patient, yes, it is of course advisable as suggested by Dr. Radha that day. I'm sorry I digressed, I didn't come back to it that day. Thank you whoever WhatsApp message. I didn't want the wrong message going out that there is no role for EUS. There are specific defined roles where you want to prove a malignancy in a situation where you might not want to do surgery otherwise. So for instance, in an asymptomatic patient, a patient who doesn't have pain of chronic pancreatitis, and you would actually do a Whipple only because of a doubt of malignancy, yes, EUS would help you in that particular scenario. So I apologize for that confusion earlier. So in this particular case, please do serial LFTs, and if they're falling down, it's more likely to be benign. So what we are worried about for biliary obstruction is persistently elevated alk phos particularly, or rising. So in this kind of a case, I think we already discussed this part, that if it is without any LFT abnormalities, probably you can wait and watch. You do not lose anything by waiting, so long as you've ruled out malignancy substantially. So if you have pain with biliary stricture, I think we did discuss that day in one of the previous cases, but I'm not sure the message went across clearly. It is possible to get pain with biliary stricture alone, but unusual. So if you have biliary stricture with painful disease, please assess clinically. If the pain is like a biliary type pain only, can you attribute it to biliary stricture alone? Otherwise, it is better to take for granted that the pain is because of, if it's a pancreatic type pain, the pain is because of chronic pancreatitis. So you would probably need a fray. So, and the fray, you can do a pre-op cholangiogram, and confirm what is the degree of biliary obstruction. And you can actually do a cholangiogram after doing the fray. So keep the catheter in the cystic duct after doing a cholecystectomy. And after you've completed the fray, again, look for the cholangiogram. If it has reasonably opened out, you can leave it at that. The reason being, you don't, there is a tendency for most of us to feel all these things are one-time surgeries. But remember, again, just like the pseudocyst drainage of bile duct after a fray tends to have this kinking in the loop. So some people like to do a roux loop, specific separate loop into the bile duct, or they actually do the bile duct first and then let it lie loose and then do the continue with the fray. So that strategy you might have to apply. But I mean, I think everybody's aware of this. This is for the non-GI surgeons, that quite frequently the bile duct itself might open out during the process of making the fray cavity itself. So many people have described that you can actually open up this bile duct adequately so that it doesn't stricture. So open up for at least a minimum of 1.5 to 2 centimeters and stitch it within the, take a couple of hitches along with the pancreatic tissue itself so that you splay the duct open and you allow it to drain within the fray cavity itself. This is an option if you accidentally drain it. I have heard many people actually say that they do it intentionally. I'm not sure that's such a great idea. If you have a biliary stricture, it is probably appropriate to drain it if you can separately. So there are a couple of articles at least which tell us that when this kind of a technique was done within the fray cavity, they subsequently had a biliary, restricture, and they had to go in again. Now, what I wanted to point out was, be careful about this scenario because this could be medico-legal, particularly if the patient did not have any evidence of a biliary obstruction earlier. So it's a rare situation, but suppose the alk phos is normal, there was some subtle dilatation, and you end up doing this procedure, and then the patient gets a stricture. We've had, in the first IHPBA, we presented that as a case capsule. Dr. Ramesh Rajan had presented that from our center. And, the patient actually had no problem till this time, but now he gets a stricture. So actually this would be an iatrogenic stricture. And you might be liable for it. So be very careful. Do all these procedures only if you're sure that it is needed and indicated in a benign condition. Anything you do in a malignancy is actually acceptable by the patient. But something which, if you're inducing a disease, if you cause this and then you actually now have a stricture, the patient needs something which he didn't need earlier. So be very careful about doing it intentionally. However, if it happens accidentally, it's a very good option to drain it within the cyst cavity. I just asked a side question. If there is no pain and a biliary stricture, so I just wanted to emphasize this particularly for the gastroenterology group, because there's a tendency to send these patients for endotherapy alone. So the treatment is not to do a fray. The treatment is to do a biliary bypass alone. So I'll reiterate that. If you have a CCP patient with a benign biliary stricture, so if you're considering the stricture because of malignancy, you probably need a Whipple. But if you're attributing it to a benign biliary stricture because of the pancreatitis process, you need to do a single-time choledocho enterostomy, except if the patient is a very poor-risk surgical candidate. So doing a definitive stenting is not the best option. The second thing is, should we add gastrojejunostomy while doing a biliary bypass? If anybody has a pressing question they want to interrupt, please go ahead. Otherwise, I thought I'll quickly run through the scenarios and then have the specific problems that you guys have directly, because I realized many wanted to give a specific scenario. So I just thought I'll run through the most important ones which we missed out last time, and then we can have more of a discussion rather than a one-sided session. So the second question which is asked is, while doing a biliary bypass, should we do a gastrojejunostomy? So just like in the triple bypass in a pancreatic malignancy, which is inoperable, so if we feel that there is a subtle obstruction of the duodenum, if there is it looks like there's an incipient obstruction, probably it is sensible to add GJ, because adding a GJ would not add a huge mortality or morbidity to the procedure of a biliary bypass or a Frey procedure. So if you feel that the duodenal obstruction is not addressed by that procedure, and there does seem to be an incipient obstruction, it is probably sensible to add it, but please document that there is an incipient obstruction. It is not mandatory to do it, because we know statistically 40% of patients who have biliary obstruction tend to have duodenal obstruction at some time during their life in this benign condition, which has a reasonably long lifelong expectancy, and the disease is not going to get cured. So, but what I wanted to stress is the reverse is not true. If you have only a duodenal obstruction and you're doing a GJ, doing a biliary bypass for a patient who's not obstructed is not a good idea. We know that 40% of these will also get a biliary bypass, but then adding a biliary procedure, particularly in non-specialized hands, does carry a bit of a baggage. So do it only if indicated. So biliary bypass, which is not indicated, should be done very, very, very sparingly, if at all. So just that point I wanted to make. And that endotherapy is not for routine biliary obstructions. Then I come to my second last case, I think, which is what to do when you have a previous pustular or Frey. Now, this can be a full, it's normally a full session, but I just wanted to reiterate that there are slight differences in assessment. It's actually, some of the points are exactly the same, but I wanted to stress that the things which are really important in this redo setting is, please do not jump in. You must have a slightly higher index of suspicion that whatever you took, please reassess the patient himself. Very commonly, there's opioid or alcohol dependence, or a patient who's not stopped smoking. So now, if you go ahead with another surgery, you're sort of doomed to failure, because this patient thinks that that slight improvement he gets in that period, he can always get that again. So I was in Jordan. I was called out for one of the surgeons. His father had the same problem, and finally I said, I'm not going to operate on you if you don't stop smoking. So I think it's important to realize that they're going to fail repeatedly unless they address the root cause, because that has a potential to actually flatten the curve, if you like, using current parlance. It's even more important than the first time to rule out other causes like duodenal ulcer, gallstones, and IPMN as well. If think of all these as potential reasons for, apart from most of us do look for things like pseudocysts and malignancy, but please think of all these other benign conditions as well. Because I've seen plenty of patients in whom, even after removing the entire, so we think that the pain is in the pancreas, but even after removing the entire pancreas, the pain persists. So sometimes the pain is not in the pancreas, it is somewhere else. So the one important difference in the assessment is, if you have a previous pustular or Frey, is in addition to the cross-sectional imaging, you must add an ERCP, because you need to check up what is the process. Is it for instance, there could be a simple single sentinel leftover stone, or a stone which is migrated to block that area, along with, so if that is alone a thing, it's unlikely to cause a problem because you've got a huge area which you have decompressed. But sometimes it's a combination of the two can cause it. So just lithotripsying that stone or removing it, or a small endotherapy can cure the entire process. But the ERCP is the best way to actually document whether the entire rest of the pancreatic or jejunal anastomosis has strictured or is intact. If the entire thing is intact, you need to take an even deeper look at what the potential cause of pain is there, because whatever you do now, you need to be sure that it's going to treat the pain with a reasonably high chance of success. Another useful technique, if ERCP is difficult or contraindicated, or there's a rule loop there, or it's disconnected, or a previous Whipple or whatever, is secretin MR. And here this actually, it's a functional assessment of whether there's additional obstruction. So whether secondary ducts, or or a tail duct, or a accessory duct, or an uncinate duct alone lights up changes on the MR. You see this enhancing or a bigger size increase with secretin is very, very suggestive that you might need a focal area of drainage alone, because any redo surgery carries with it a huge baggage of morbidity. So if you can actually localize it to the point that it is causing, it might be very useful. This has got a very specific indication, not for all cases. How do you manage in case you need to do a redo? It's important to realize that we have this concept of pacemaker being in the head of pancreas, and whatever you do in a redo surgery must address the head. So if it is only a simple Pusto, the Partington-Rochelle surgery was done, perhaps doing a fray alone might be appropriate if there is no evidence of disease elsewhere. You can just convert the same with the same loop. You can convert to fray and get a long-lasting relief. One of my patients is actually on Facebook. You can see him with that kind of a thing. If the fray has been done earlier, you can actually convert to Whipple, or even after a simple Partington-Rochelle, you might think that a Whipple is more appropriate, particularly if you have any residual pseudoaneurysms or small pseudocysts, or any doubt that it could, lesion could be malignant, or any coexisting IPMN, you might need to add Whipple. Very, very rarely do you do a total pancreatectomy alone. I would do total pancreatectomy only either as a third surgery, which when I'm at my wit's end, or if there is clear evidence of IPMN which is diffused throughout the duct in association with chronic pancreatitis. Many people believe that in this setting, at least, you must add some kind of a neurolytic procedure, either a sympathectomy or a ganglionectomy. But the jury's out on that, because actually the results for these are only in the first 6 months. So I suspect many of these patients get relief are the ones who are still opioid or alcohol dependence, or continuous smoking. So those three things must be addressed, because some of these patients, once they're on that, we might be much better off going through a longer, let them burn out the disease, because in those cases, we are definitely going to get a recurrence of pain. So it might be worth consulting a psychiatrist and getting them involved in a counseling session. Make sure they get rid of that, follow the WHO pain protocol, and then if it still persists and we can see mechanical changes, then go ahead with surgery. I can't stress this strongly enough. So I think we already did this. And my final case is what to do with this portal vein thrombosis with portal hypertension. Very, very important to have a very high threshold for surgery. Again, this is the second kind of case. Please send to a specialist center. Even the best specialists would be extremely wary of doing this surgery. They will not be very excited about it. This is one of the few challenges you can do without. Try maximum endotherapy. And this is the kind of case, if you have a, say only a biliary stricture, try endotherapy, try lithotripsy with stenting. Get friendly with your gastro and say that, in exchange for your other cases, let's do this. Because peculiarly enough, because whenever they see portal vein thrombosis or any portal hypertension, they send this with a much lower threshold for surgery, where it should be the other way around actually. If driven to a corner, you can attempt a fray rather than a Whipple, because Whipple trying to get that window is going to be a nightmare. The combination of the presence of a thrombosed portal vein with absent, with collaterals running all those, plexuses of Sappi and Petron and all those, there are going to be a disaster zone. In addition to that, the sclerotic process of chronic pancreatitis is going to make even an artificial tunnel extremely bloody. So please, if at all, try only a fray, not a Whipple. If you think it's a malignancy, sometimes you might be better off actually leaving it, because you must realize, I think it's very, very important to balance when you think you're a messiah and the devil. And many times the patient realizes there's a very slim difference between the two. So understand the difference between cure and heroism. A very small proportion might be actually suitable for doing a prior portosystemic shunting. So if it's a young kid with a very long expected lifespan and an early portal vein thrombosis, you might actually think of doing a splenectomy, LR shunt, and linear shunt bypassing the portal vein. And once do an interval fray or bypass whatever it is there. So this is a case where be very careful. Understand that this is one malignancy where you might kill more than the malignancy if you go ahead with surgery. That ends my formal session of the slides, and I thank you with this Caracara from Crested Caracara from Costa Rica. I couldn't resist the alliteration, so that's why I added this slide. So how do I get
Sir?
Yes, Ankit.
Sir, just now sir told total pancreatectomy very rarely if indicated, but if IPMN, sir told if IPMN is involved entire ductal system, that is one of the indication for total pancreatectomy. But sir, main duct IPMN is always include entire ductal system. No, sir?
Yeah, so the disease process itself can be, so the papillary disease you can have a ductal dilatation, but the suggestion that you're giving is that every main duct IPMN needs a total pancreatectomy is not true. So basically, you have the main duct type of an IPMN where the papillary structures are lying in the main duct itself. And say if it is in the head, for instance, the relative obstruction can cause a distal dilatation of the entire duct. So in this case, you can get away with just doing a Whipple or a slightly extended cranial resection rather than a total pancreatectomy. So what you're saying is true, that it's difficult to actually assess till where. So there are several techniques. You actually do a better cross-sectional imaging, but the best which has been described is a pancreatoscopy. So if you're doing a Whipple, for instance, you look in through a pancreatoscope, or even the duct is dilated enough, you can use the regular ureteroscopes and all those any of the things borrowed from urology as well, and put it into the distal duct and make sure that there are no, because sometimes you can get discrete separate lesions in the distal duct. Unlike the biliary papillary disease, papillary carcinoma of the biliary tree, you need to actually excise the entire biliary tree. So even if it's a gallbladder cancer with papillary cancer, you remove the entire biliary tree. And sometimes we've had patients where we've needed a Whipple subsequently when they get a papillary malignancy in the pancreas as well. But in a pancreatic type alone, you only restrict the pancreatectomy because you want to preserve parenchyma. You restrict it to the part which is involved. So if it's only a main duct IPMN involving only the tail, you do not need a total pancreatectomy. You can just get away with a distal pancreatectomy. So branch duct, main duct, I'm glad you raised this because I realized some other people also had the same doubt. So you only remove the part which is involved by the papillary process itself.
Yeah, Pramod, what's your question?
Sir, I have a question regarding biliary obstruction without pain, sir. You have told surgery as a first option, I think, but I think guidelines are recommending multiple biliary stenting for 1 year, followed by surgery.
Which guideline?
I think ASG guideline. I think so. I don't remember.
Indian.
American gastroenterology guidelines.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly, sir. So I'm not sure.
Yes, the only pancreatitis guidelines which actually recommend endotherapy as first choice are the European guidelines. And I urge you to read those guidelines to see why guidelines should be a help. It's a guide and not a chain on you. It should not be a chain line. It's one of the, I've had this in a debate with Dr. Manu in IHPBA in Hyderabad, where these if you look at those guidelines, they have actually quoted randomized trials showing a benefit for surgery, and in the guidelines given level 1 evidence for endotherapy. I have not understood how remember the consensus guidelines are people like you and me sitting together with a little more formal setting with better clothes. Remember that it is always a guideline. especially those which are consensus guidelines without evidence. And in this particular setting, I've actually seen the guidelines conveniently alter the very same papers which go against the guideline. So please look at the European guidelines on this, and you'll have the answer. Forget about the guidelines, but common sense wise, a biliary obstruction with no pain, if you do a choledochojejunostomy, you are giving the patient a single shot relief. If you have this disease, what would you want? I'm clear in my mind. This is, if in a chronic pancreatitis, I would try to do as much avoiding surgery as much as possible. If I have a biliary stricture, I don't want to go into a secondary biliary cirrhosis. I have several patients in our pancreas clinic in Cochin, in Dr. Balakrishnan's database, who've gone into silent, who were for a long time they've had stenting and actually have gone into silent SVC. If you can give me any single logic why they should go for this thing, I will accept it. So I would only send for biliary stenting a patient who has some significant comorbidity rendering his surgery difficult, or he's got portal hypertension with varices there, which is going to make surgery dangerous. Apart from those two settings, I'm very clear in my mind, you should, irrespective of the guideline, you should go ahead with surgery first. If you ask a patient, even in, there are papers showing quality of life papers in CBD stones. In CBD stones, where patients have actually preferred open, not laparoscopic bile duct drainage, but open CBD surgery. Also, they've preferred to multiple attempts at. So please ask the patient for the guideline. Merely because the guidelines are set by somebody who's a gastroenterologist. You know, the portal biliopathy, the entire guidelines are set by, not a single surgeon sat on that. That's why they actually recommended endotherapy as the first line therapy for the Indian guidelines include only endotherapy as first line treatment for portal biliopathy. So please look at guidelines so along. It's exactly like a meta-analysis. It's garbage in, garbage out. But do you have any suggestion, Pramod, why, any reason why stenting should be done first?
But maybe because it is less invasive, we can try stenting for 1 year. If not,
you think it's less invasive?
Sir, actually, that
surgery.
Sir, actually, as per ESG guideline, what they recommended, if we do head-to-head comparison, endoscopy therapy versus surgical therapy, then surgery is definitely superior to endotherapy in biliary stricture. But because of the less invasive, we can try first in endotherapy for initial 2 to 3 sessions.
So do you see the conflict of interest? Please remember, in the American setting, a surgery there costs so much. You know, till I think about 6 or 7 years back, screening guidelines. There's screening guidelines in a country where colorectal cancer is weak on colonoscopy or barium enema. Colonoscopy or barium enema, because colonoscope. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
It said my thing is unstable.
Yes, sir.
Colonoscopy we know is better. Even an idiot is going to say that you should do only colonoscopy for screening, but their guidelines actually said or barium enema because it was cheaper for them. So please understand, for them, you know, a CT scan might be cheaper than a gastroenterologist going and visiting a patient.
Sir, we can answer the same thing in exam, sir. The surgery will be a first.
Please answer what you're going to do practically. Please answer what you're going to do practically, if you can justify that. So in the West, it is cheaper for them to do 2 endoscopic procedures than a surgery. It is cheaper for them. The omeprazole there costs $40. It's cheaper for them to do a reflux surgery after 6 months of omeprazole. If we use those guidelines, you know, for us, it will take about 30 years for it to be cost equally effective. So please understand what the background of those guidelines. I mean, don't use the exam thing as a sort of you know, a cobra's sting on me. Exam, we are assessing only how how sensibly you're going ahead. We've had people saying exactly opposite things in the exam and passing both. If they're able to justify why they are doing it, it's your setting which is extremely important. But to use a guideline to say that I'm going to do biliary stenting in a patient who's otherwise a good risk, would you do that if you would do that in your practice alone, or if you would do that for your brother, please go ahead and say that in the exam as well.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Puneet, Pravesh has got a question. What is your morbidity with total pancreatectomy in your experience?
Yeah, so I must say, there are some procedures we are very, very reluctant to take them up. So it was my belief, looking at literature, that's very morbid procedure. I think it's a fair question, because I don't know whether many of the total pack. I'm giving you a long prologue before answering. If I give you the statistic itself, it might be fallacious. So there are two subsets. Some total pancreatectomy which I've seen are done as part of salvage procedures for Whipple's, very, very, very poor results. But done for the setting of in CCP and all that, it is actually not as bad as believed, because we do not have the morbidity of a pancreatic drainage procedure. It does cause a brittle diabetes, which in my experience, funnily enough, has not been that bad. So I've done it in patients like von Hippel-Lindau, where it was non-malignant. There was diffuse cysts in the entire thing and multiple neuroendocrine tumors. So I counseled the patient for about 3 hours, and when they came back, they said we couldn't understand why we were so scared for 6 or 7 months. When they came back for follow-up, they're absolutely okay. They just needed 10 units of insulin, because there's no glucagon as well. So insulin alone, very small dose of insulin is actually adequate for them. But I would still put a rider that I have done it only in patients who are very well educated, very well counseled, over counseled, if at all. So please, before you translate that into a rural patient who cannot have access to even blood sugar daily or on demand, it might be a difficult thing, because literature wise it is supposed to cause a very brittle diabetes. I don't know whether Indian patients behave differently, but even in Cambridge I found because the health system is sort of socialized, so very good access, so they don't have as high morbidity as or mortality as we believe from literature. So please understand that entire prologue before you jump into every case for total pancreatectomy. I personally am still very circumspect, would do it only if driven to a corner.
Yeah, Jaya has raised a hand. What is it?
Sir, in a CCP patient with biliary
Yeah,
stricture,
I think it was you who pointed out thanks for, I think you pointed out about the US, isn't it? I think my phone actually crashed after that, so I couldn't reply. That's why I took this, and I realized that's why Dr. Radha had asked that question at that time. Thank you for that clarification. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. So one doubt, sir. In a CCP patient with biliary stricture, before going for biliary bypass, do we need to rule out malignancy, like do a cytology or biliary brushing or something?
Yes, I think I've stated quite a few times. We like to look for very objective guidelines, but in all benign diseases which have a malignant potential, it's the tendency is actually to be very, very subjective. So your gut instincts and all are extremely important. So a very young patient where you with all normal tumor markers, everything, and you have a low index of suspicion, you have to look at that. But an older person, even with normal tumor markers, yes, you would try and look for biliary in every study shown for malignancy, elevated alk phos and bilirubin elevation and jaundice is knowing that there's a huge benign biliary stricture in this setting. In all those meta-analysis, this comes up as a recurrent risk factor. So yes, we must try as much as possible to go and look for that. Yes.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Put it to very basic questions. Question number 1 is presence of calcification mandatory to call it chronic pancreatitis?
Sorry, what is that?
Do you need to see some bit of calcification somewhere to call it chronic pancreatitis?
No, that's a very good question, because I think lots of people have had that, and only a senior person will ask that question. No, it is not mandatory. For instance, for acute pancreatitis, the definition that the original Atlanta, when they gave it in 92, 93, they actually said necrosis at the cellular level to be a mandatory requirement. how you can actually, you're not going to do a pancreatic biopsy to look for that, but they put that as a, a definition of that there should be some level of necrosis happening at the, to call it necrotizing, it is not just that gross necrosis. So likewise in chronic pancreatitis, there is the presence of calcification suggests chronicity, but it's not a mandatory requirement. And again, the calcification can be parenchymal calcinosis, which may not even be a part of the chronic pancreatitis process. So like in patients with hyperparathyroidism or other cases of metastatic calcification, you might have calcification, pancreatic hydrated. You might have calcification in the parenchyma, retention cysts, all those where there's a dystrophic calcification, and that's not chronic pancreatitis. When it is intraductal, it would tend to imply chronic pancreatitis, but it's not mandatory.
Yeah, now the issue of acute on chronic pancreatitis is something which is discussed quite often. Then, how do you exactly call as acute on chronic pancreatitis? What radiology, how will radiology suggest that?
Yeah, so I asked this question to Dr. Peter Banks when he came on a visit to, GB Pant during my MCH time. And I specifically raised this question. I said, in every textbook, the acute pancreatitis chapter is written by somebody and chronic pancreatitis chapter is written by somebody else. So he laughed and said, in the next Schlesinger, he's doing both. But funnily enough, he didn't answer the same question. I think even 30 years down the line, the question you asked is extremely valid, extremely pertinent. There are discrete acute pancreatitis, there's discrete chronic pancreatitis, but where they overlap, I think there's a huge overlap. And if there is an overlap, I think it should be taken as chronic with an acute recrudescence. So if we practically take it like that, I think that's sensible.
So one other question, Puneet, is it mandatory?
How much more time do I have?
You have enough time, no worry. Are you in a hurry or did you go somewhere?
No. My laptop I can switch to the phone. My laptop battery is about to go. So in case it goes, I'll come on Zoom.
Okay. Now, is it mandatory that all the calculi need to be removed when you operate in chronic pancreatitis?
Yeah. So I think the best questions have come from Dr. Radha, especially the ones which the people get confused in the exams particularly. So So I think it's very, very important. It's not the calculi we are after, but the calculi are symptomatic of the areas which are potential areas for a blocked system. So I think what Dr. Radha is hinting at is extremely important, that these areas could be secondary ducts which are obstructed. So it is important to attempt to remove all the ducts, and this is even more important. So many people actually chase it in the tail area quite a bit. So, especially in the Frey setting, I would actually be less, worried about the extreme tail towards I'd rather not do a splenectomy to get that last stone. But in the head, the same or smaller stone in the head actually can hide a much bigger glandular area where you can get a recurrence of pain. So and one of the reasons for Frey's success is actually you're removing part of the glandular tissue and unleashing all the ducts, small ducts, which could be potentially harboring these stones, and removing some of those stones along with the parenchyma itself. So you must try and remove as much of the calculi as you can, but the calculi are not the aim. So if it's free floating and you've got, theoretically, if it's free floating and you have a adequate drainage, that is never going to obstruct the system. But they could be harbingers of an obstruction somewhere or the other. So be very, very careful in trying to remove as many as you can. I guess that's what you were suggesting, Dr. Radha?
Yeah, fine. I mean, I'm not suggesting, I'm asking for an opinion.
I realize all your questions have a reason for a good answer. So I'm being very...
Yeah, Ankit has got a question. He says, is the patient with parenchymal calcification and ductal calcification, is there any difference in management?
No. Absolutely no. So if you don't have any calcification also and have the same rest of the morphological characters the same, you go ahead with the same. So in a poor risk patient with significant pancreatic calcinosis is the kind of patient where I would presume that there is some dystrophic calcification happening. So if he's a poor risk case, I might not do surgery in that patient. So I might have a higher threshold for surgery in those patients. I don't know if I'm getting across clearly. So what I'm trying to say is that the chance of this patient already having bad pancreas, not much of pancreatic parenchyma left behind, I might consider this patient for continued conservatism. So apart from that rider, I don't think there should be any difference. I think my thing has come to one. I've left my charger in the office because it's half day. I'll just come on to this other the Zoom here. I need to follow the same link.
Just click on the link.
Do I need to shut off the same place?
Yeah, yes, you have to. You can't log in two places.
Okay, how do I?
Just click off.
Leave meeting. Am I there?
Yeah, very much. Yeah, the Swapnil, what is your question? Swapnil?
Hello.
Yeah.
So do we need to supply the enzymes for how much time do we need to supply the enzymes after the surgery of pancreas? Any surgery of pancreas, typically.
Supply means
How much time do we need to give the enzymes such as pancreatoflat?
so. Do you think we need to give enzymes at all?
Sir, I remember because I have given enzymes for like 2 to 3 years, but after that patient is telling that I don't require enzymes as such. So do we,
So basically, the patient is telling you he never needed enzymes. So sorry for the reflexive question, but I think the enzyme requirement is at its own merit. So many of us end up giving enzymes as a something to give the patient because he has a chronic disease within inverted commas, even though they are not indicated. Not a good idea. So I think if you have done surgery, I would actually, a patient who's been on enzymes earlier, I would actually stop it to check whether his steatoria is improved, because I said the other day also, the malabsorption can be one because of inadequate parenchyma itself. So it's end organ failure. So there's not enough enzyme synthesized at all. The second reason is because it's obstructed, it's not reaching the digestive tree. So the second component is going to be treated by surgery. So you might have a small proportion of patients who are actually treated after the surgery. So I'd actually stop it to see. So I would definitely not start patients on enzymes. Now, somebody who's on enzymes, who have documented steatoria earlier, because clinical steatoria is very common, it's very unlikely that after surgery, I will not need them. I would still give a small trial for my own satisfaction to see how much benefit there is there. But this would happen only when almost 90% of the parenchyma is knocked off. So it's quite likely that they're going to need it, but it's always a good idea to assess that subjectively. So elastase is the easiest method of doing that, and otherwise the gold standard is the fecal fat estimation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Any other question?
Sir, this is Dr. Jaipal, sir. Good evening, sir.
I've got a text. There's a text question from Pravesh Shukla. One second, it's disappeared now. Is that come under messages?
Yeah, I'll read it out. It says, if the patient has a history of acute pancreatitis with a cystic lesion, how to differentiate between IPMN and pseudocyst if CECT is inconclusive?
So this is like I said, what Dr. Radha asked last session. This is probably the best indication for EUS and guided FNA. So if you have a doubt, and they coexist, it's important to realize that they actually coexist. So if the index of suspicion for IPMN is high, it's probably wise to do that. Sometimes, if you get a typical picture on the endoscopy itself, you might not need to do the EUS. But yes, an endoscopic proof would be worthwhile.
Jaipal.
Sir, this is Jaipal from Amrita, Kochi, sir. I have small doubts. It's autoimmune pancreatitis, sir. This this autoimmune pancreatitis can cause intraarterial calcifications and pancreatic calcification can present later also, or it is always like. Because I was little confused because it's always included in the chronic pancreatitis group.
Yeah. So autoimmune actually is, the overlap with chronic pancreatitis is not all that much as, for instance, even with IPMN. It presents very distinctly. Calcification is much less common. It's more cranial. It's got that, sausage-shaped pancreas. It's got all the endoscopic features and all that. In a poor, if you're suggesting that we should do, I think autoimmune markers are expensive to do the entire gamut of them. So I would do where there's either an index of suspicion of malignancy is high, or it's completely atypical chronic. I feel that something is wrong somewhere, or it's a very high risk patient where even the small missed case, I would rather know, that it's before going ahead with surgery, because we know that giving a trial of steroids would help. So on the flip side, many, some people from a rural setting have actually asked me, if it's typical of autoimmune, can we give a trial of steroids? Personally, I feel this is not for the exam, but on the practical side, I see no harm in giving a patient where it's otherwise suggestive. Patient cannot afford to get autoimmune markers, doesn't have access. It costs him so much. And it's very typical. Before deciding on surgery straight away, I think it's absolutely sensible to give a trial of steroids. You don't lose anything, a short course, and then go ahead with it. We don't have to just go by that because the Western guidelines said so. We have to do it.
Yeah, Jaya, your question?
Sir, one more thing, sir, the extension. If suppose a patient with autoimmune pancreatitis presented with some ductal stricture or something later on, means if we give steroid, the strictures and all can go back, or is it unlikely?
So in autoimmune, all these, it's not a stricture, organic stricture. It is the swelling in the gland which is causing aberrations in the duct itself. So it's wise to follow up after that. If you're giving presumptive steroids and all that, I think it's sensible to. I hope it doesn't go as a recommendation from me, but it's sensible to actually, Sudeep is giving some. Sudeep is there online. I think he's giving some nice tip. If he's there online, I'd love to hear him because he's one of the most erudite surgeons I've ever met. So I think
very kind, Puneet. Hi. So a very small practical thing that we've been using, that we know that IgG4 is a subunit of the whole globulin proteins, and your level of IgG4 to be elevated is above 2.8. So if your whole globulins are 3.5, then you're never going to get an IgG4 elevation. So the cheapest thing you can do is look at your globulins. If your globulins are in the normal range, even to find an IgG4 elevation is exceedingly unusual. So that's a very cheap filtration way of looking at things.
That's a fantastic suggestion. I've never heard of this before.
So this is entirely homemade. So we're just looking at it, but it's common sense.
I saw something flashing as a message, but I wanted to hear because I knew there would be a pearl where I would learn something.
So maybe we can validate this. I don't know whether this is a simple, because all of us have seen three cases of IgG for pancreatitis. So it's not that we see dozens, but if we put it together.
I think we should look at all, because it's very easy to do. Every case would have had a serum protein done. We can just look at the globulin. It's a fantastic idea. I think we should do it as a project.
Yeah, Dr. Jaya?
Sir, I already asked. Thank you, sir.
Okay, fine. Any other comment, question before we call it off?
Hello.
Yeah.
Dr. Dr. Radha, Dr. Sudeep, do you have any suggestions? Yeah.
Yeah, Sudeep, can you put your camera on? Yes.
Yeah, so I'm not particularly well dressed, but I'm here. Yes.
This is the lockdown attire, anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice seeing you.
Oh, it's always a pleasure, and I'm very glad that you're doing all this, because it takes away from boredom, and we get to see good friends.
Thanks, thank you so much. What are your expert comments or anything to add to what Puneet has been talking about?
Yeah, so my main struggle with all this, and I've asked everyone from the south, is the diagnosis of malignancy. And I really, you have EUS, you have CT, you have MR, whatever you do, you're always caught napping on table. And one of the things I've noticed is you open the duct and you see some fleshy material come out. That is a sign of deep trouble. But I suppose that's a bit late in the whole algorithm of management of malignancy in chronic pancreatitis. So I think there's no foolproof way to go about this whole situation. So it's just a little disheartening that whatever we've used, how much we've tried in advance, I don't think we're very good at predicting it.
No, absolutely spot on, Sudeep. I think that's the biggest, that's why I kept reiterating again and again that it's extremely, extremely subjective, although we are looking for objective evidences. All those EUSs with those things have actually you're absolutely spot on. And, even Ramesh's data has also shown. So I think it's very, very sensible to be humble and say that we're never going to be on top of this completely. So I think 70-80% or 90% is a fantastic thing. The only thing is that all the cures that we've seen are actually not the lesions. It's like where in the endosono was touted for neuroendocrine tumor, and most of the endosono pointed out neuroendocrine tumors turned out to be something else.
Absolutely.
So we found on digital palpation a different one, and did that. So likewise, I think. It's important to realize that some of the cures have actually been ones where the actually CCP was large, but only a small focus of accidental malignancy was there. So
Right.
even those the only ones who got cured, bulk of the patients who had that kind of a disease, by the time if the pain is because of the malignancy, they're almost always never salvageable. If it's a vascular compression and all that, they're never ever salvageable. So the vast majority are not. So I think the entire exercise is for that very small proportion. So I think we must recognize that we're not gods in that.
No, Puneet, the other question I should ask you is that supposing you have a 3.5 centimeter mass, we are not sure whether it's malignant or it's benign. All the younger surgeons, examiners, everyone says do a Whipples. But I have been stuck with a few Whipples in patients who've actually turned out to have chronic pancreatitis. And I don't know whether it's a thing from my part of India, but they do so much more worse than a phrase procedure. They're nutritionally terrible. Their sugars are labile because they do have a partly functioning pancreas and no glucagon, which is actually probably worse than doing a total pancreatectomy. And they're actually much worse to manage than I don't know whether the survival benefit of doing a Whipples in a tumor or missing that 20% is worth doing the Whipples on just any suspicion of malignancy. So I don't know what you feel about that.
No, I think you said two different things. One is about any suspicion of malignancy. I completely agree with you, because it's very easy to pass off any head mass as any suspicion of malignancy, and that's why I was reiterating.
Yeah, once it's a malignancy, it's a no-brainer. But if you have a high suspicion, then obviously you'll do it. But
yeah, the specific scenario you gave of a if there's a well-defined lesion within the pancreas which is suspicious, I would, as of now, still do a Whipple in that particular case.
No, absolutely. But you have a head mass, it's a little bit thicker than normal.
Yeah. Understanding that, you're going to get benign in a proportion of them. I have to say that my experience as far as managing the patient is completely reverse. My feeling was that I should never be doing a Whipple. In fact, in a meeting in Trivandrum, I was told that I was told off that I'm not doing enough Whipple, so I shouldn't be making this statement. Funnily enough, when I did enough, I actually realized the management of those patients was not difficult. In fact, I have a reasonably large, I would say about, off the top of my head, this is, we should actually look at that data, but about 40% never became even diabetic. So right. I've been telling them that, this is going to be bad for you and all that. And so my experience in this is opposite of yours. Those patients have been remarkably easy, and they've actually had a better pain relief but then I must say that I think they were better selected cases, better counseled, because
the patient has to twist my arm to get a Whipple out of me in
Right.
that scenario.
So,
I'm never pushing it, but I think your point that my worries, whenever I'm advocating a Whipple is that the other, the candidate should not feel that I'm actually pushing a Whipple for every chronic pancreatitis. The last statement, I completely agree with Sudeep 300% that please do not do it for any suspicion of malignancy. You must have a strong subjective, and I think or the experienced surgeon in this case, the evidence may not be there, but I think it definitely helps in having a high index. Every single patient that Dr. Balakrishnan sent to me saying that this is likely to be malignant turned out to be, most of them inoperable, of course, but then they all turned out to be.
An announcement to make, Puneet. Ramesh will be coming in this platform from tomorrow onwards at 4 o'clock for 5 consecutive days.
Oh, lovely, lovely. Yeah.
Now, next question, DB, what is your question you have?
Hello.
Yeah.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm Dr. Deepak from Jaipur, sir. My question is about a patient came with pain abdomen and with a sonography, suggestive of pancreatic duct dilatation. A sonography was 2 months ago. Now we got a CT. It is again pancreatic duct dilatation, around 6 to 7 mm. Isolated finding, pancreatic duct dilatation. No other finding on CT. How to manage this patient, sir?
Is he still got pain?
No, sir. Intermittent pain.
That's why the first case, I'm sorry, I don't know if you remember, but there for the previous session, the first case I put up because I wanted that message to go across. I have seen too many of these patients where discussion. I actually uploaded a WhatsApp conversation from a specialty group of, GB Pant, which has the highest number of, the longest duration of MCH running. A super specialty group where a question was asked exactly the same, saying the patient is asymptomatic. Now what should we do? So you do not treat for symptom deficit disorder. Please don't worry about radiology alone. So the radiology is to help you. I'm using your, riding on your back to again reiterate. Please look at the symptoms. As the patient keeps going to different people, only the radiology gets looked at and the patient goes into the background. So I think it should be exactly at its own merit, depending on, the kind of thing. If it's a first attack, I think you can safely wait. Many of them never get a second attack. Some of them, the stone has, disimpacted, it's passed off. Many of those things can happen. The pancreas itself can get atrophic. So I think you have to take a clinical decision on the pain. That does this, ask yourself, does this disrupt the patient's social, economic, or any quality of life? In which case you need intervention. So you don't need, merely because the duct is dilated, you do not need, is not an indication for supporting Sanofi or any other lab which is, producing the enzymes.
Sir, duct was dilated throughout the pancreas. Pancreatic parenchyma is normal. Pain
Right.
is mild and intermittent. For that, she just underwent a sonography and found to have a pancreatic duct dilatation. After 2 months, we got the CT. It was still dilated, and later on we got a MRI, and there we found a mass that was malignancy.
Okay. Right.
Any,
Where was the mass? Yeah.
any further questions, comments? Yeah, I think it's a wonderful time we spent with you, Puneet, on chronic pancreatitis, and we'll soon come back with another area of your specialization. Thanks for spending, and that too from all the way from Rishikesh. And thanks once again, and I'll close this session. Bye.
Thank you.